So next up, my friend Parag. Parag, do you want to come up? Parag is a great friend of mine. He's a Singaporean. So Parag is a geographer and a political geologist, and he has written 7 books. Bestseller. His books influence policy around the world. He has TED Talks with millions of views, and today he's going to tell us about the geography of how not to die.
There you go. All right, thank you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Bryan, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and I just want to congratulate you and the entire Don't Die team for pulling off such an amazing event. Thank you all for sticking around. So, had to give a lot of thought to what to title this talk when Bryan pinged me on WhatsApp and said, hey, do you want to talk about this? And I was like, oh my God, longevity, I don't know if this is my scene. But I was like, wait, how can I bring geography together with longevity? And it occurred to me, it's pretty simple. You just have to not mess up the title of the talk. So I had to make sure to get this right. We are not calling this session Where Not to Die, because that would imply that we might have some suggestions for you on better places to die. But Bryan doesn't want you to die, and I don't want you to die. So note, the title is Where to Not Die. What are the places where you stand the highest likelihood, of course, of not dying? And so this is where there is such a natural alignment between Bryan's vision and mine, because he wants you to invest in longevity, investing in yourself, in people, in that health span and that lifespan, living longer. What we do in my company and what I do is thinking about places. How do you make places future-proof? Bryan's business is making you, people, future-proof. Mine is making places future-proof. And you have to think about both at the same time. Because really, a lot of us think that we live in the cloud, right? You conduct so much of your daily life and your affairs online. But you actually very much live in a place and places, and you have a choice as to what place you live in and making that place the kind of place where you're not going to die. So whenever you hear the word where, you're talking about geography, or as I like to call it, geographies. And geography is not so simple, because there are multiple lenses and layers through which you have to look at it. There is the natural geography, which, again, you think about the static map on classroom walls, or you think about a globe, and it's pretty simple. You've got your blue for your oceans, and your brown for your desert, and your green for your forest. But as you well know, that's not so stable anymore, right, because of climate change. So you've got to get that right. You've got to get your political geography right. 75 years ago, there were only 50 countries. Today, there are 200 countries in the world. You've got volatility, conflict, turn on the news, Ukraine, Gaza, and so forth. So you don't want to be in the wrong place when it comes to your political geography either. You've got your functional geography. That's a fancy way of saying your infrastructure, the built world, supply chains, economics, places where there are jobs, places where there are not jobs, that kind of thing. And it's a huge part of dictating where people live and don't live is the quality of the infrastructure. And all of that will drive the human geography, which is the geography of us, right? So where does it all come together? What places have the climate right, the politics right, the infrastructure right, so that you can confidently feel that you won't die when you're there? Now, I'm going to double-click here on one of those factors or variables, which is climate. This is a nice, stable, static map of the world, right? Calm, placid. What am I showing you? There are 8 billion pixels on this map. All of you are a pixel here, all of us. This is the present human geography of our civilization. Now, I want you to look very closely over the next 5 seconds as I animate this. Okay. No longer such a steady, nice picture, right? This is the climate map. And I bet climate change didn't get a lot of attention yet today, but come on, is that going to affect your lifespan, your health? Yeah, of course it is, right? It already is. And this map is becoming reality painfully, tragically faster than we think. And there's not a whole lot that we're doing about it. There's a lot we can do, but we're not doing enough. So red does not mean unlivable, but it means less suitable for human life than it was before. Green means more livable. And that's the way the world is being divided into places that are survivable and places that are not. But sadly, tragically, and the great irony in a way of this, or what I consider to be almost an ethical crime, is that most of the human population, most people in the world, are literally trapped in places that are becoming increasingly red on this map right now. The future of human life, humanity itself, is in the wrong places right now. Bad geography. They're not likely to live as long as they would like. So, of course, you're here to invest in, again, your own longevity. The equivalent of that in geography is resilience. In a way, longevity of lifespan is the human version of resilience. What is resilience? The ability to bounce back from shocks, from disruptions, from challenges, right? To build back better, some would say. Well, places can be resilient too, and you want to be in resilient places. So what we do is to look at every single geographical coordinate in the world, right down to the size of this building for the whole planet, and say, well, what is the future climate profile of that place? Hurricanes, droughts, floods, wildfires, tsunamis, coastal sea level rise, you name it. And what is its resilience to those risks? Does it have seawalls, water desalination plants, reservoirs, flood control measures, fire stations, everything, all the infrastructure, the stuff we build to make it a place that is livable, a place where you're going to live longer. Now, before we got into applying geospatial data science and all of fancy technologies to this concept of resilience, there were places where people were inherently resilient. We've only been able to analyze them and poke and prod them in retrospect, but we now call them, of course, the blue zones, right? The places in the world where people have had the highest longevity, and we think of them as naturally occurring, right? Well, what do those places have in common? As you know, people who have the residents have plant-based diets, they have a sense of purpose, they have low stress, they nap and they pray, good work-life balance, they socialize, they feel communion with nature, and they're spiritual. And there's a few places in the world, again, Okinawa, Japan, some islands of Greece and Italy, where people have had the highest lifespan. And we think of these as the blue zones. But again, what's missing from this picture? The climate, right? So sure, there are blue zones, but if you layer in the climate map and climate stress, suddenly any number of those places where people have been living into their 80s may not be such propitious places in the future. So the places I'm looking for, the equivalent of blue zones, are what I call climate oases, right? Places that are well adapted, places that are resilient to climate shocks, while also, of course, being places where you can lead a long, healthy, fulfilling life. And so the shorthand for this is places not just with the right attitude, but also the right latitude and altitude, right? So you want to bring all those things together. And when you do that, you'll find that some of the places that today that rank as the most livable, desirable in the world, again, may not be. I'll give you a couple of examples, and I'll pluck straight from the news. The city that always ranks first in every index of livability, great city, lifestyle city, great hub, is always Vienna, Austria. Now, I know you guys have been busy. I love Vienna too, trust me. But, well, maybe I don't need to tell you, but I might need to tell the others because you guys have been busy in this conference. Have you been paying attention to what's happening in Vienna, Austria right now? The city is completely flooded. The world's most livable city, number one on this list perennially, is underwater. In fact, a big chunk of Eastern Europe is underwater right now. Bridges have been washed away, right? Agriculture decimated. Entire cities will no longer be habitable for a long time to come. And these are rich countries. So you have to factor in the climate angle with your traditional metrics of livability. So, of course, we want places with clean air, fresh water, walkability, culture, and so on. Personal, important favorite for mine, countries that have late start time for schools, so you don't have to wake your kids up early in the morning, or they don't wake you up. So there are plenty of places where those come together, but do they also meet the climate test? And as places, think about that heat map I was showing you earlier, the literal heat map. As places become less and less livable due to climate, even though we think of them as being livable from the standpoint of governance and society, there's going to be some very painful trade-offs. And in these same countries that rank so highly, like Japan, European countries, Canada, you have heat waves that are killing tens of thousands of people every single year, right? You have these natural disaster events, typhoons, hurricanes, and so forth, that are rendering assets, homes, entire communities devastated. So there's a city, a country in the world that you may have heard of that is not on this list, strangely enough. Can you think of what it is? I don't know. Anyone? Oh, yes, indeed. Maybe it's called Singapore. So a place that is both a blue zone, life expectancy in Singapore is as high as anywhere else in the world, and it's also a climate oasis. Not because of our latitude, interestingly enough. We're right on the equator. You ever see those T-shirts, like, 1 degree north? And yet, we have engineered this country, the founding fathers of this country. What did Lee Kuan Yew famously say is one of the principal attributes that made Singapore a success, besides multiracial orientation and good governance, was air conditioning, right? And so you have to think about that. Now, we're going to play, for those of you who live here, Guess the Neighborhood. This is some very top secret satellite imagery of my neighborhood. Now, if I tell you that it's the place whose streets have the most, don't die non-compliant diet of very, very sugary pastries, and where every other store besides a bakery is a pet groomer, you might know where I live. But what's more important is that the way Singapore is designed, the way we get to live here, meets those tests of being walkable, being community-oriented, being sporty, being outdoors, having the green tree cover. And note, of course, a high density of tennis courts. I think you guys may know or may have heard that if there's one sport that increases your longevity, it is, in fact, tennis, my favorite game. And we have a high density of that, too. But one of the things that I often have to remind people when they praise Singapore and venerate Singapore is, of course, we're a very small country, one of the smallest countries in the world. And the challenge we have is for 8, 9 billion people, right? How are we going to retrofit and adapt the map of the world amidst accelerating climate change to be a collection of Singapores, places that are blue zones in longevity, but also climate oases? And that is the task that lies ahead. To think about what the new civilizational centers are going to be. Think back to the fact that cities, we've had cities for 7,000 years. For any given century, it's not always the same list of the top 5, top 10 great hubs of commerce, of industry, of talent. It's different, evolving places that compete with each other and adapt to the circumstances, exactly as Darwin would have predicted. And so think about forecasting through geography. What are those next civilizational centers? And are they being adapted? What role are you playing into making them the climate oases, blue zones of the future? And we have a lot of work to do in that regard. This is not the definitive answer where these stars are. Yes, you can go and buy property there. Yes, you might think of them as lifestyle hubs, holiday homes, whatever the case may be. But it's much more than that when you're thinking about these things on a civilizational scale. And by that, I want to come back to people, right? Ultimately, the subject of this conversation. Not just the places, but the people. Who are those people of the future who we are building the present for? Who the resilient places are going to be home to whom? And this is where, again, not least because of climate change, but we are at an inflection point that we have never seen in world history, which is that we're reaching what's known as peak humanity. Now, I'm sure all of you are on social media, so you know that this is Elon Musk's great obsession, is the peaking and declining of the world population. Now, no matter how many children he has, He cannot, unfortunately, he cannot straighten this curve. It's peaking sooner than we thought, and it's going to collapse sooner than we thought. And so it's that much more paramount that we preserve those people who are alive today, especially because those people are the young people. As much as we talk about an aging population of the world, in fact, 60% of the world population is young, right, is below the age of 40. Millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, what I'm showing you here. And for the last 100 years, every generation has given birth to a larger generation. That just stopped. And COVID had a lot to do with it, but even going back to the global financial crisis, we've seen that there have been a lot of incentives, economic stress and so forth, even climate consciousness, that have disincentivized people from having more children. And so we will find ourselves in a situation that can only be described in a sci-fi sort of way, which is that the present is the future. In other words, today's youth, who are already the majority of the human population, are also the majority of the future population because they're not having children. That includes a lot of you. A lot of you who are millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha. In all likelihood, you may not have kids. You don't want to, or again, it's economic, whatever the case may be. But the point is that you're a contributor to this declining world population. So the present is the future. And everything we do today is to prepare for or to adapt those people to that turbulent, volatile future and find them the places where they can live those long lives and not die. And we are not only experiencing the demographic curve in ways we never thought imaginable, a peaking and decline of the world population, and climate change at an unprecedented rate. What follows from those two things is mass migrations on a scale we've never seen, again, in world history, with maybe 1 billion people relocating, voting with their feet because they have to or want to, today, tomorrow, the next 5, 10, 15 years. And of course, as all mammals do, exercising their fight or flight instinct and wanting to be in places that are stable, wanting to be in climate oases, wanting to be in places that are politically stable as well. And so I'm just generally pointing here to vectors of migration. By the way, you're seeing this every day in the news, right? When are you not reading about the record numbers of migrants moving from Latin America across the Rio Grande River, of the populations of the Arab world and Africa crossing the Mediterranean? Even in Central Asia, you're seeing ever more of the South Asian population there, given how stressed it is. We have to start to prepare for this. And how? Well, by building. And again, so many of you think, or we all think, that we just have the luxury of living in the cloud, but you don't. You live on the ground. You live somewhere. And where you live today may not be where you live tomorrow. Or if you're lucky enough to live in Singapore and maybe live here forever, that's not true of the other 8 billion people in the world. And as that population starts to decline, I think we will appreciate what we have a lot more, right? And we'll want to preserve it. We'll want to preserve human life for all of us and think about where they need to be. And there are 2 things you can do if you want that present population to also be a healthy future population. You either move people to where there's resources and wellness and infrastructure, or you move technologies to the people where they need them. One of those 2 things. But whatever it is, you have to build that future. It's not just built on the ground. It's not just built in the cloud. It's built on the ground. Elon Musk wants to terraform Mars. I believe we still have a lot of terraforming left to do on Earth if we want to have a lot more places that are livable and where you're not going to die, places like Singapore. And so this is the final mission that I believe we all have to contribute to, which is what I call reprogramming geography. Again, bringing together our digital thinking and skills, our coding abilities with reality on the ground, and building a map like this where you enable that fluidity, that mobility of people to find, to live, to adapt, to build sustainable habitats. So maybe it's very appropriate that I'm the last speaker of the day, because I get to end with a rallying cry that I think everyone is going to get by it and remember, which is, of course, builders of the world, unite. Thank you.
You guys, that talk was exceptional, wasn't it? Like, amazing. I really appreciate you being here, giving us a map of the future and how we can think about it. So, loved it. Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you, everyone.